All right. So for this week, we will be finishing off the Slasher trilogy and we will be ending with our pitches for Nightmare on Elm Street. Same setup as before. A studio has come to us and has said, hey, you can do whatever you want with this IP, have at it, and we are going to be pitching what we would do. So I'll go ahead and throw it over to you to get us started.
Right, thank you. So before I get started with the actual pitch, I figured sort of a trend that we'd been doing with these big three pitches, just sort of some background on our history with these respective franchises. So for A Nightmare on Elm Street, um, I growing up, I always knew of Freddy Krueger. I kind of avoided horror movies like The Plague when I was little because they just scared me, and at that point, I didn't find being scared to be fun like I do now. But, I always knew, who Freddy Krueger was. I knew Nightmare on Elm Street, all that. But it was, Halloween of my freshman year in high school, a very formative year and a very formative Halloween, where I just decided little 14-year-old me, I was like, in my head, I'm like, I'm an adult, I'm a big kid, and I need to start liking horror movies because that's what big kids do around Halloween. So I decided I am going to watch a scary movie from start to finish tonight. And, I'm not going to get scared and I'm going to like it and I'm going to be a big kid. And it just so happened, whatever network it was, I honestly can't remember what network it was, but probably it was AMC because they always do their like Fear Fest thing, just showing horror movies all throughout October. But that night they were playing A Nightmare on Elm Street, but not the 1984 one, the 2010 one. And so I sat down and I watched that by myself in the dark. And even though it was made for TV and they definitely edited a lot of it down, it still terrified me, but I liked it. And so that sort of started and jump started and launched my love for horror and horror films. And that's why, as a big horror hot take that I know that we both kind of share, the 2010 reboot of this franchise is sort of near and dear to my heart for nostalgic reasons. Because of that, it was like the formative horror movie that put me on this path of being a horror fan. And I find it to be a very underrated and underappreciated, uh, not even just horror reboot, but horror movie in general. And I also know that you have some interesting thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, so this is interesting. I'll go ahead and give my history of the franchise. I mentioned in the last video, Jason's my guy. Love Friday the 13th. The first horror I ever watched was Halloween. I did a Halloween binge of 1 through 8, and so that was what got me into horror. And I know we're not doing pitches for it, but I even prefer the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies over Nightmare on Elm Street, which isn't necessarily to say they're bad, but this was always kind of like the ugly stepsister when I was younger. Like I would, if something else was on, I would go for it over Freddy. And it's not that I don't like Freddy. He just never really scared me when I was younger. And I like, but the idea scares me, if that makes sense. So like one of the things that made it so awesome is that Wes Craven thought, well, what's the one place that you're supposed to be safe while you're sleeping in your dreams? And so he creates this dream demon that attacks you in your dreams. You can't escape. You're in his realm. And so like the idea was really freaking cool and I 100% respect it. I admire it. But this franchise as a whole was never one of my favorites when I was younger, so that's just kind of my background. And then going on to the 2010 reboot, I 100% agree with you. It's probably like one of the biggest hot takes in horror cinema, especially slasher cinema, because a lot of purists absolutely hate the 2010 reboot. I love it. I think Jack Haley's performance is amazing. I know a lot of people didn't like it because it goes a lot darker, a lot grittier, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Kind of like I said with the originals, while I love them and respect them, they never really scared me. They were much more comedic to me. So the fact the 2010 reboot is actually scary is really good to me, at least in my personal opinion. I think Kyle Gallner's great. I believe it's Rooney Mara is great.
Mhm.
Um, and I still to this day quote a lot of the Jack Earl Haley Freddy Krueger lines, which isn't necessarily to say anything about Robert Englund. He's one of the greatest to ever do it. I love him as a horror icon. But for some reason, some of the lines that they craft in that 2010 reboot are just so memorable to me that I still find myself quoting them to this day. So yeah, I just I love the 2010 reboot.
Yeah, it does it have its flaws? Sure. Is it perfect? No. Is it the best reboot we could get? Also, no. But I gave it like a solid 3.5 out of 5. I really appreciated what Haley brought to the role. And I know that like originally, there's always Freddy's always been a character that's had this balance of like dark and twisted humor with the being scary and being, creepy, but they definitely leaned a lot more into the sick and twisted aspect of Freddy, both just not just in what they have him do in the movie, but also just in how he carries himself, the lines he delivers, his overall just sort of vibe and appearance. They went in like the grimier, slimier version, and I just think that that worked, especially for a character like Freddy. He just seems like the kind of person that would be kind of sick and twisted and perverted, which he is. And like originally. I feel like this franchise, more than any of the others, devolves the most into like going on just full on goofy. Maybe Friday the 13th a bit, but like I feel like, I mean, especially like Freddy's Dead is just absolutely just like straight up Looney Tunes. So this one I feel like had the largest fall from grace, in my opinion, as a franchise.
I feel like I would, especially of the big three, I think I'd agree with you. If we include Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it kind of gives it a run for its money because that franchise has just no continuity.
For sure. Yeah, out of these big three, I would say Freddy has the sharpest cliff jump.
Definitely.
But out of the three, I would say this is my second favorite. Halloween is still my first. Nightmare on Elm Street's my second. Friday the 13th is my third. And I have seen these all the way through. Unlike Friday the 13th in 2020, I went all Halloween season 2020. I went all the way through all the Nightmare movies. Up until that binge, I had only seen the original and I had seen the reboot, obviously, as I had mentioned. So yeah, out of the entire franchise, I've seen the reboot the most. I've seen the first, the second most, and then all the ones in the middle I've only seen that once. I have not rewatched yet. Probably will, maybe in upcoming horror horror-a-thon years. But yeah, so that's sort of my distribution of the franchise.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with everything you said. Is it a perfect reboot? No, but I think it's very fun. Like I said, the line where he goes, "Why are you screaming when I ain't even cut you yet?" I don't know why. That just has resonated with me. It's just such a great line. I love that so much. And yeah, Jack Earl Haley's great, and I think they kind of like you alluded to. I won't spoil it, but they took some liberties, and at least in my personal opinion, I think they land. I know some other people don't like the specific liberties I'm alluding to. I'm sure you understand. You know where I'm going.
Yeah. I think it's always been something that has been, sort of suggested maybe gets a little bit in that direction with his interactions with some of the people,
Yeah.
but they just kind of just went full on, let's just fully embrace that.
Yep.
But for a character like Freddy, who you're supposed to, he's supposed to be the villain, I didn't mind it.
I agree. And it's not that Jack Earl Haley isn't still comedic. I just think he's comedic in a different way.
A very twisted, dark sense, like even darker and more twisted than I think England ever was.
Definitely.
So, yeah, the last thing I'll say about that, just my favorite little details. I like the little thing he does with the claws. Like when he like walks up, it's like and scraping against a pipe. He like like rubs them together, and it makes that little
Yeah.
like metal shearing noise. That was a cool touch. Hearing that,
I,
I
I
just
agree
that's one little
completely.
detail I appreciated. But if you don't have anything else to say, I will just dive right into my pitch.
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay. So for this, I am going. So for Halloween, I did a full complete reboot. For Friday the 13th, I did a full complete reboot. I am breaking that streak and I am doing a legacy sequel, just like Halloween 2018. So A Nightmare on Elm Street 1984 took place exactly how it took place. And it has been about 40 years. I'm setting mine in 2024 just because, that's next year, 40 years. and none of the sequels happened. So it's just been 84, and then now we're picking up with these events now. And instead of A Nightmare on Elm Street, my pitch is called The Nightmare of Elm Street. So, like I said, this takes place in the year 2024, 40 years after the events of the original film. We meet up with Nancy Thompson, played by Heather Langenkamp. Now she's an old woman living in isolation in a remote cabin in Montana. Nancy is traumatized by the events that happened back in 1984, and she's been living in self isolation through a series of expositions, news broadcasts, radio broadcasts, all sorts of little flashbacks to sort of set up the scene here in these first couple minutes. We learn that she lied about the murders that happened in 1984. She blamed them all on Rod, Tina's boyfriend, saying that he committed all these murders. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Rod, died in that prison cell, and there are all those witnesses, and there were murders that took place after Rod. Well, it was the 1980s. There wasn't the internet yet, and her dad was a cop. So her dad kind of helped keep everything a little hush hush, kind of paid some people off and got everyone to look the other way to make this entire series of murders, pin them on Rod, who of course is dead, so he can't defend himself. All of her friends are dead, so they can't contradict her. And this is all to keep the secret and knowledge of Freddy Krueger to the grave, to stop him from spreading and stop him from killing for good. Because if you recall, you have to sort of know about him in order to dream about him and bring him back. So in these 40 years, Nancy has basically perfected this Eastern meditation technique that allows her to avoid deep sleep and dreams by basically microdosing sleep and meditations, enter unconsciousness, but she hasn't dreamt in 40 years. Trying, like I said, to take the knowledge of Freddy to the grave and never encounter him again. One day, in her cabin, though, when we pick up in the beginning of this film, she runs low on supplies and she needs to travel into town to get some more heart medication for a heart condition that she has. So in the town, she sees people living their normal lives. She begins to question her life choices and wonders if Freddie is dead for good and she might be able to return to society in a normal life. Nancy subsequently runs into an issue when the pharmacy that she goes to is closed, and she starts to panic because she's out of her heart medicine, and she starts going about her errands. On the bus going back to where she's going to walk back to her cabin, she begins to have a heart attack. She goes into cardiac arrest. The bus pulls over, and EMTs administer a sedative, which Nancy resists but forcefully succumbs. And in her sleep, she enters that familiar boiler room, and we see an old, gray, even more wrinkled Freddy, even more disfigured than we've ever seen him before. And he gives us his iconic "Hello, Nancy." And of course, he's being played by Robert Englund, an old Robert Englund, of course. And he laughs and he chases Nancy. And in the real world, we see that she's screaming and thrashing and she's drawing a crowd. Nancy then levitates into the air as bystanders record on their smartphones in awe, and she screams one word, Freddy, before being sliced open and killed. The clip soon goes viral of her floating in the air and getting slashed. Some people call it fake, some people say it was demon possession, but everyone is asking one question. Who is this Freddy that she's talking about? And eventually on the screen, we see all these tweets and all these posts and all these texts wondering who is Freddy, hashtag who is Freddy is trending before one anonymous user reveals the truth and links to a news article of a series of child murders done by one Freddy Krueger in Springwood, Ohio, back many, many years before. And then we get the title, The Nightmare of Elm Street. So now, going from Montana, we go back to modern day Springwood in 2020. We meet a student reporter who works for the Springwood High School newspaper named Joseph and his group of friends. One of his friends shows Joseph the viral clip, which he immediately dismisses as a fake before he sees the anonymous tweet that links it to the 1984 Springwood murders and the earlier Freddy Krueger child murders. And he heads to the library to begin to do some research on his town's history. As he does, he uncovers a town conspiracy and cover up that runs deep. That night at dinner, Joseph asks his parents about Freddy Krueger and the events in 1984, and they get visibly uncomfortable. In short, later that night, Joseph hears his parents arguing in a hushed tone about Freddy Krueger and secrets in the town, and how Joseph can, quote, never know for his own safety. That same night, a group of Joseph's classmates, including one of his friends from before, attend a quote unquote dream party based on a TikTok viral trend to quote unquote talk to this Freddy Krueger. And they take sleeping pills and all fall asleep and enter into the dream world, where they're subsequently attacked by the same old grizzled Freddy that we saw in the beginning, who seemingly gets stronger the more blood he sheds. While they are all brutally murdered around Joseph's friend, who watches in horror. So he's the only one that didn't take the sleeping meds and thus is the only one left alive. So the parent of the house where all these kids were at hear the commotion and call the cops. They come to break the door down and storm the room. They see the friend covered in blood, surrounded by mutilated teen corpses. And as they arrest him, they see one cop sees the words Freddy's back scrawled in blood on the wall. The next day at school, Joseph hears the entire school gossiping about his friend, the murderer. And Joseph leaves school and drives to his parents' pharmacy and confronts them and tells how he overheard their conversation the other night and wants to know what they're hiding since their chicken has come to roost. His parents reluctantly tell him that they were high school students, tell him that they were high school students back in 1984 when the murders happened, and his mom's maiden name is Gray. Her older sister, Tina, was one of the first murders. The official story was that her boyfriend, Rod, was the killer, but that wasn't true, and Tina's BFF, Nancy, determined it was Freddy Krueger, a child killer from the 1950s who was killed by parents. Sorry, I had to flip the page, and came
Uh,
back to haunt them. And with Nancy and her dad's help, they thought they could quash the knowledge of Freddy, since knowing him and thinking about him is what allows him to return and haunt dreams. Joseph's friend, now in his jail cell, tries to convince the guard that he's not guilty and should be set free. The guard laughs him off and tells him to get some sleep, and the guard himself puts his feet up on the desk and dozes off, despite his warnings. And his friend, I just didn't take the liberty of naming him, my bad. And his friend watches on in horror as the guard is killed by Freddy in his dreams. And Freddy possesses his corpse. Yes, that's right. He's possessing the dead corpse of the cop to open the cell and put a bloody knife in his hand. And Freddy laughs through the guard's mouth as a SWAT team swarms in and Freddy exits the body. And now Freddy's coming for you is written in blood on the wall. Joseph then gathers the rest of his friends and tries to make a plan to take down Freddy once and for all and do what their parents never could. The whole time, Joseph has been tracing a thread on who the anonymous user was that first brought knowledge of Freddy back. And before it's too late, they have a plan and prepare to enter the dream world to bring Freddy into the real world. Him and his friends fall asleep and enter the iconic boiler room and have a big final climatic battle with Freddy, bring him to the real world, and go to kill him when Joseph's parents barge in and stop the kids from killing Freddy, instead knocking the real world Freddy out and tying him up while subduing the other kids. Joseph asks why, And his parents reveal that they planned the whole thing to get their revenge on Freddy because he killed his mom's sister, Tina, and it turns out that his dad was Rod's younger brother. Since they own a pharmacy, his dad was able to find Nancy in Montana because of her medication, and he had the pharmacy closed to make her have a heart attack, and his mom was the anonymous commenter. Joseph doesn't see how they could use so many lives in order to bring Freddy back. And his dad reveals that their entire family name was cursed because Nancy lied and blamed it on Rod, which is why he changed his last name and also why his last name wasn't Rod's last name. The parents then get to torturing real world Freddy, who says all sorts of threats and profanity. But Joseph breaks out of his restraints, taped mouth. He knocks his parents out with a lamp, and now left with an incapacitated Freddy in the real world. Joseph makes the move and kills him by stabbing him repeatedly until he ceases to make noise and slumps over. Joseph lights a match and burns the house down, with the real Freddy now in the real world's body in it. In the aftermath, the police come and arrest Joseph's parents, and Joseph outs them as the killers, leaving Freddy out of it. The entire incident being labeled fake news and just a passing TikTok trend. Now, Freddy is dead for good because he was brought in the real world and killed. He believes in his way that his parents were right, and it's best to leave the past forgotten. He finally goes to get some well earned shut eye, but as he closes his eyes and drifts off to sleep, he hears Freddy's iconic laugh. He opens his eyes and he jolts awake. And that's it. That's the end.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. It's interesting because as we've said with some of these other pitches, I love the modernization. I love that, you know, this is a TikTok trend. Like I love that it goes viral. You get the modernization of, oh, they're going all over it. Oh, is this real? Is this not real? You know, like I do enjoy that aspect. Um the I think I need more time to think on the ending because it's kind of growing on me. Though when you first read it, I'm not sure I 100% liked the ending. But yeah, no. Overall, that was very solid. I think I'd watch that. I like that there's a lot of murder. I
Right.
like that
No,
there's a high
definitely a
body
lot of
count.
killing.
Uh,
What about the ending? Or like which part of the ending? Like
the,
the
the
very ending or like the
no
parents?
the big reveal with the parents. Um, I get that because so or my, I'm gonna sit so their legacy has been cursed because she lied and said it was Rod. That part makes sense. But then they set it all up and caused a bunch of murders so that way they could bring Freddy to the real world and then do what?
Kill Freddy, like for good, as like part of their revenge.
Right. So since Joseph was just gonna kill him anyway, why didn't they just let Joseph do it?
I don't know. They wanted to do it. You know how sometimes movies go.
Yeah,
It's
no,
their
that's the
moment.
part that I totally get that. That's the part that like kind of threw me off. It was like you're gonna purposely give up your plan, make your son hate you, even though he was going to just do it all for you, then you could have had clean hands. God forbid the cops don't believe you, you get to blame your son. They seem like the type of parents who would have thrown their son under the bus. So like that was the part
Oh,
that
for
got me.
sure.
That they did their whole like I'm going to tell you my story and then it just completely backfired, which is fine. You're right. Movies do that. But that I just want to make sure I did follow correctly. They stopped Joe from doing it just because they wanted to be the ones who did the final. Okay, I understand.
So, yeah, no, I wanted it to be almost like Scream
Yeah.
2022, where it's sort of the same thing, but with a modern it basically be the requel, where it's not just a legacy sequel, sort of like a requel more so, where it's basically the same thing, the same general plot beats and patterns in the modern day, but it also has like those legacy characters and the legacy plot tying into it. and yeah, just like emphasize a lot of themes explored in the original about the past and whether you should, is it that those who, should you move on from the past, or is it those who forget history are doomed to repeat it? Sort of like those are the two competing ideas I feel like with a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Yeah, that's fair. I definitely got the requel vibes. I got the Scream vibes. I see what you were. I also got the Halloween vibes. I think this would be very solid. I feel like that was the massive reveal at the end felt very like not obviously it's not a whodunit, but I'm glad you brought up Scream because that reveal at the end where they were like, well, this because of this, because like that felt very Scream to me. So I like that, especially because they're both Wes Craven, so it can be a nod. Like I like that.
Right, exactly. And I didn't mention this before, but literally along those same lines, I was going to have Radio Silence be the directors who did Scream 2022 and Scream 6, just because, I feel like with this style, I mean, they already made some good sequels, legacy sequels to Wes Craven properties. So I figured who better than them?
Yeah, I was gonna ask who you were gonna have direct it, so that I'm glad you brought that up. That's all right. I like it. Um,
Yep. The Nightmare of Elm Street. And I also I just wanted to like I know like there's a little like really I was being a little naughty with the tease because I didn't I wanted to like definitively kill off Freddy because I know with like Robert Englund, if he was ever brought back, like he's not like they shouldn't bring him back for like three more movies because he's old and he's to move on. But with this, I wanted to like be able to bring him back, but also just like definitively kill him off. The ending more so what I was trying to convey is like leave it open a little bit to like tickle your brain, but also be like it was probably just a regular dream, but now he's just going to be paranoid for the rest of his life,
yeah,
you know? So,
yeah, I like that it's kind that you kind of get to pick it. You can either say that he's
mhm.
alive, or like you said, he just has that trauma now.
Right. He just has that generational trauma, and it just might be a regular dream, but he's going to have a lot of trouble trying to decipher regular dreams versus Freddy dreams from now on.
In my head, I imagine that he goes along down the same path that Nancy did at the beginning.
Mhm. Something like I just wanted to leave that open for that. So
I like it. I know you were kind of doing it with the blood messages, but I was waiting for you to have creepy children sing the Freddy song.
yeah, I thought about like making the blood messages like one, two, Freddy's kind of like make each of those be like a message, but then I was like, I mean, maybe if I actually got a chance to do it, that would be a little bit more of a nod, but I also felt like that was a little bit too like ham-fisted.
Yeah, no, you're good. I like that you did his classic laugh at the end. When you said he was going to close his eyes, I just assumed that's when the girls would start singing and it would roll credits or something. But I like that you did the laugh. That's better.
Yeah, and I kind of imagined like you've seen The Descent, right?
Yeah.
Like the ending of The Descent where it's like her eye like the camera like zooms in really fast and her eyes like jolt open. That's sort of like basically just like taking a big inspiration from that was sort of how I was imagining that. Like big like, orchestra or like violin screech is like it moves in really rapidly and the eyes dart open and you hear the laugh and then cut to black.
Okay. I like it. Before I go into mine, because mine's a complete reboot, I am curious, what are your thoughts on Wes Craven's New Nightmare?
Like I had said, all those middle ones between the original and the reboot, I've only seen once a couple years ago. I
Mhm.
remember liking it a good deal, but not loving it. So I definitely didn't hate it. It's one that I feel like I am the most curious to rewatch that and Dream Warriors. But yeah, I remember watching New Nightmare being like, okay, this is kind of weird. This is different. I can see how this is like his proto Scream, like trying out the meta stuff. It was interesting for sure. I appreciate Wes Craven being able to like flex his creativity. Felt very much like a passion project, so that was really great for him. I just don't know. It kind of just left me with like a weird feeling of like, okay, I guess that's in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It was a little odd. It didn't quite click for me, so to absolutely love it.
Okay. Yeah, I know that's one that is relatively divisive in the franchise, so I was just curious. It's funny that you mentioned Dream Warriors because Now, similar to like what you said, I watched the original when I was younger. I watched the reboot, and then I didn't watch the middle ones, I think, until also 2020. I had seen bits and pieces because it's, I watch a lot of like kill stuff, whether it's like the, oh, Freddy's best kills or whatever. And so, like, I had seen bits and pieces and like scenes, but never all together. And if I remember correctly, Dream Warriors was probably my favorite of them, which, but that's like the exact opposite of a hot take. If I'm not mistaken, most people say that number three is the only other good one besides the first one.
Yes. Um, okay, so just real quick, because I pulled it up on my letterboxd. So this is 3 years old, but I had from worst to best. I had Freddy's Dead. I had Nightmare 5, The Dream Child, Nightmare 4, The Dream Master, New Nightmare, Nightmare 2, Freddy's Revenge, Nightmare 3, Dream Warriors, the reboot, then the original.
That sounds almost exactly how I would do it. I remember just not
And
liking any of them after three.
yeah, I would definitely, like I said, want to rewatch New Nightmare because I have a feeling it would replace 2 and be my number 4. Um, but anyway, yeah, this was just from 3 years ago though, so take it with a
Okay.
grain of salt, I guess.
Yeah. All right.
So
Thank you for reading that. I was definitely going to ask.
yes. So all right. Let's hear your reboot pitch.
Okay. So, kind of like what you said before you gave your Friday pitch. As I mentioned, this was kind of the one that I would avoid as a kid. It wasn't really my thing. I enjoy the character. I enjoy the general plot, but kind of like you said with Jason, this pitch is going to be like if I was to do it, what I would like seeing where I think it'd be cool to take the character, but it's probably going to upset the diehard fans, or it might not be, kind of like what you. I apologize, I keep saying that, but like kind of like you did with Jason, where it's like how you would want to see the character to where you would like it, and it's not necessarily quote unquote true to the franchise. So with that being said, mine is a complete reboot. Now, mine does not star Robert Englund. I know he has famously said he would never come back. So for this reboot, I didn't even want to touch it. So this was very interesting. I was having a hard time deciding who I would cast. And my runner-up ended up being Simon Baker. I was like dead set on him for the longest time, but then the other guy, I thought more about it. I was like, nah, I can't not go with my number one, which is Walton Goggins. Um,
Yeah, that's
every
the one that I'm thinking of.
Okay. Yeah, that's his everything he does is just perfect. He has such great range. He can do action, drama, horror, whatever. He plays a great psychopath. His facial expressions are awesome. He's got an amazing smile. Specifically, I was looking for the smile, and then also facial expressions and like delivery. He does comedic stuff very well. So Walton Goggins in my head, put on the makeup. I think he would do a good job. So that's who I picked to star in. I'm calling it Krueger. Like I said in the last episode, I really enjoy using the name. It's cool to me. So this one is called Krueger, and it is directed by. So first, let me say, the movie I have crafted is a psychological thriller. It is going to feel like a really bad trip, and because of that, I have I have hired the none other than the king himself, Eli Roth. I don't know if I've mentioned this on any podcast, but Eli Roth is like my horror idol. Essentially, I love everything he does. And when we agreed to do these pitches, you probably knew Eli Roth was going to show up in one of these, and this is the one I thought would be the best. And you're
That's
going to see
interesting.
why. Um, so similar to the Jason one, this is not like Halloween where I had it like scene for scene laid out. I have a general outline that I will read to you, and there are certain bits and pieces that have specific that I did create the scenes for. So the movie starts off on a dimly lit road at night, and there's a guy who's driving. He's going to be driving around some turns. It's in a wooded area, kind of like a mountain. and the credits are going to be playing. It's going to be very chill. You're going to feel him just kind of driving, like the wind is down, the windows are down, wind's in his hair. Like it's supposed to just feel very calming. And then right as the credits end, he is hit by a truck. You're just going to see him. He's driving. He doesn't realize he went through an intersection because it was just so crazy. Like, okay, I know this. It's late at night. No one else is on the road. Who puts an intersection in a mountain? Like that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, you'll just see lights to the left of him, and he's like, and get hit by a truck. And then Kruger will come across the screen. And essentially, we are going to cut to a hospital where the guy who we just saw is in a bed, and the doctor is informing his family that he is in a coma. They don't know when he will be waking up, and that's the last we see of the quote-unquote real world. The following hour and a half-ish is going to play out in real time of this man who is in a coma, so he's permanently stuck in Freddy's playground. And essentially, the idea I wanted to toy with is the dream demon getting an unlimited toy, if that makes sense. And so, kind of like I did with the other movies, there are themes. And so, this main character is going to have a lot of trauma. And in order to scare the crap out of him, Freddy is going to use that trauma against him. And so, there's going to be multiple different points where, like I said, this is like a tension-building psychological thriller, so to speak. And so Freddy is going to be putting him almost through these trials and tribulations, and we're going to learn about this character. In my head, I didn't necessarily pick exactly what he'd be dealing with. I kind of wrote some things down. Maybe he happened to be addicted to drugs at one point in his life. Maybe he was unfaithful to his wife. It could be, you kind of can pick what you'd like in your mind as far as what he's going to be put through, but we're going to learn a lot about this guy. One thing I will say is he's a good guy who's made some mistakes, is the best way I can put it. Like, you're going to like this character. It's not going to be like he's an a-hole and you're rooting for Freddy, if that makes sense. And so, the whole point of this is that Freddy is almost like the usher for this guy to just go through what he has been avoiding for however many years, and it's a game to Freddy, which is why he does it. He's enjoying having this trapped victim. So, kind of like what we're used to, Freddy plays with them a bit, and then eventually he gets the kill. With this one, since he knows there's unlimited time, that's why he's just going to be playing with him nonstop. And so that's kind of my justification for why he wouldn't just kill him. He knows that he's trapped there, and so he wants to have his fun. And this is where I was like, I don't know if this is 100% true to the character and the lore of the franchise itself, but in my mind, Freddy seems like the kind of guy who, if he did have a toy that it was just his to do whatever as he pleases, that he would want to just milk it for as much as possible. And so, as this goes along, this is where the Eli Roth part comes in. So, like I said, it's going to be almost like an acid trip. We're in the dream world. All things can happen. Anything you could possibly think of. Freddy is in my opinion, he's one of the best at making very creative kills, and so I imagine that this is almost going to feel like you're high, I guess, is the best way I can put it. It's going to be, you're never going to be in one place for too long. It's going to be constantly molding and shifting as this person is going through these trials and tribulations. And then the way that I have it ending is that so slowly over time, Freddy is putting him through these games, or through these trials, I should say, and the guy keeps being about to fail, and then maybe he'll remember his daughter, or he'll remember his wife, or he'll remember his mom, whatever it may be that kind of gives him his willpower to get through the trauma. And Freddy's like, oh, oh, okay, I guess I got to make it harder next time kind of thing. And that kind of will happen throughout. And the point is that this guy is going to work through his trauma. And then eventually, once again, I don't know if this is 100% realistic, but since he's in a coma and it's his dream, eventually he will get control and not kill Freddy, but kick him out. And in my head, I imagined it to be almost like the end of Malignant, where she gains control of her brain and she's able to stop Gabriel from taking control. And so in my mind, he eventually works his way through his trauma. He no longer feels like this weak person that he's been throughout his journey, and he's able to take control back of his own mind, and he pushes Freddy away. Like I said, it's not killing him, it's just kicking him out. It's almost like the metaphor of getting over said addiction or whatever is troubling you. This kind of was inspired by, I was listening to this thing, and the what was the quote? It was a lot of times we end up being our own we end up being our own barrier, we end up being our own limits. And so like don't get me wrong, like there's stuff that is addicting, addictions are real, there's chemicals in the brain that can be out of balance, which leads to a lot of mental illness. But also there are ways to work through that, and sometimes we get so in the rut that we just don't want to. And so this guy hasn't wanted to for so long that it took Freddy in order to push him where he needed to go. So when he ends up waking up from his coma, he'll be a better husband, he'll be a better father, he'll be a better son. And so that's kind of how it goes. The last part of this, I added some extras. So this is completely a solo story. There's no origin of Freddy. He's just the harbinger of suffering. I like the idea that Freddy places this man on quests and watches as he tries to make it through his own mind. He slowly takes pieces of him, almost like it's a messed up game. So there we go. That's another part that like I said, Freddy's playing with his toy. So in my mind, not that, of course it's a dream. So like I didn't personally want to have stuff happening in the real world. I wanted to stay in real time. I guess we could have it jumping to the outside where we see like his finger get broken in real life. Like I guess that could be a thing, but in my mind, it was just start to finish in the dream world. But as he like fails, Freddy docks him, if that makes sense. So he could lose a finger. Maybe he ends up getting a Freddy carved tattoo in his leg, like little things like that, little markers to remember. Almost like how if you're trying to get over an addiction, maybe you happen to be an alcoholic. Every time you go for a beer, one of the ways that you can train your brain to not go for it is you can shock yourself, or you can do some sort of negative stimuli in order to make yourself not want to go for that beer. And the point is that whenever you go for the beer, you then think of that negative feeling, and you don't want to do it. So that's kind of where I was going with that. Like Freddy will do little mini pieces of torture as he's going through, because he will fail and before he succeeds. I like the idea that Freddy is always there, but he only shows up at the end as coma guy, I didn't give him a name, is gaining control. You know, he's learning, he's progressing through his inner healing, and Freddy can see that. So that's what I mentioned. That's what I meant when I mentioned that he's like gonna start making the games bigger, better, more harder to progress through. And then the final two things I have written here is Freddy is like depression and anxiety, trying to keep you from improving in your life. The thing I was talking about where we oftentimes are the ones keeping ourselves from improving, and so Freddy is supposed to be a metaphor for that. And then I really want the movie to be like a mind melt with imagery and lots of weird, gruesome, freaky moments, and that's where Eli Roth comes in. I'm sure the two of us together can come up with the weirdest movie you will have ever seen that will have a lot of fun special effects and be really creepy. And so yeah, that's like my last sentence. So I think I hit all of the major points. Once again, I apologize that there's not like scene after scene, but in my head, after that first scene where it's all calm, then he's put in the coma, I want it to be like in real time from start to finish in his head. There's no cuts. We see him going through this gauntlet. And so, since I didn't necessarily think through what the trauma would be or what the gauntlet games would be, I didn't like it. That's why I kind of just had to say what the actual overarching synopsis would be. So that's my pitch for Kruger.
Okay, interesting. I think that might be the most different one out of any of the pitches either of us had given. Different from the original source material, that is.
Yeah, this one was very, this one was a little crazy. It was a little outside the box. I was curious what you would think of it.
Who would you cast as the unnamed coma guy? I was trying to
Um,
just like picture someone in my head, but I couldn't
yeah,
quite.
off the top of my head, I would put like a Jamie Dornan.
Okay. Yeah, no, I could definitely see someone like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
somebody
that
who would be able to do the acting, but also has like a really likable face.
right. No, for sure. Yeah, no, well, first of all, Wins, I think is a great choice to replace Freddie. I think as of right now, he might be getting a little too old just to start, but I think him, like, I agree with everything that you said about him as someone who would definitely like nail a character like this. So I really appreciated that angle. But I really just like the getting to spend the time in the dream world because you're kind of right for like most of these movies, at least. Like it's the exception, not the rule. So like to be able to spend like a whole movie with like the dream world and like dream world physics and like dream world, you know, the visuals and the interactions with the world that would be different. I think that would be like genuinely so cool to see, like seeing that play out. Like it would just be like this whole other parallel universe that you're dealing with, and that could be very terrifying, especially in the hands of someone like Eli Roth.
Yes,
Um,
I'm glad you got that. I would like to explore and have fun with with like you said, the world's essentially your oyster. You can pretty much do whatever you want, and that's the cool part.
so will you try? It's like I I didn't know if this was, maybe I just didn't pick this up. Are you trying to convey that maybe it was all just in his head to begin with? Or you're gonna, like, I know you said you were gonna leave that final mark, like his finger's broken or there's like a scar. Is that supposed to be like a twist of like he wakes up thinking it was just like a coma dream, and then it turns out it was like real? Or like were you just like intending the whole time to be like this is real and he's just stuck?
So, when I mentioned that it was a potential thing to add, I wasn't I wasn't necessarily so in my head, as he's going through the gauntlet, I don't want to cut back and forth between him and the coma, but at the end when he wakes up, I'm completely okay with him seeing that tattoo or whatever it may have been. Um and in my head, it's kind of like what you did with the laughter, where leaves it ambiguous, like was it real, was it not real? Um, I didn't necessarily want to say for sure.
Hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, no, I kind of like, I mean, obviously I left mine open ended, so I like open ended. So yeah, no, that's good. Who would you put like like the classic look on Freddy? I guess since I'm trying to visualize it and it's just different because the movie itself is so different. I'm like trying to like connect pieces together. Would you go like completely radically different with like the look, or would you maintain like the classic look?
So this is going to be slightly hard because you haven't seen Freddy versus Jason, but I know that he does this in other movies. So, you know how Freddy can take the form of stuff?
Mhm. Sort of like a Pennywise.
Yeah, in Freddy versus Jason, he specifically takes the form of a very poorly CGI'd caterpillar. And so, in my mind, he would show up in the different games as different characters. And then from afar, he would be the normal Freddy. In my mind, I pictured Reboot Freddy just because I was trying to go a little bit darker. But you can kind of either way, he has that burned face, so to speak. So, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. I would say the Reboot 2010 Freddy, but maybe even a little more disgusting, considering that I would have Eli Roth behind it. But the majority of you seeing Freddy, he will be other characters or other animals or whatever. Like he'll be in the gauntlet, and then all of a sudden that creature would change into him, or the human would change into him as the guy like wins or loses the specific games. Um, it wouldn't be like he's the watcher almost like just sitting kind of narrating as the guy goes through, if that makes sense. Like he's taking a part in it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that. No, that I think that your pitch is very, very different, but I mean that in the best way possible. That I really like and respect the very different creative angle.
Nice. I will admit when we created these three pitches, this was the one I was most worried about. So I'm actually glad to hear that it got a good review.
No, I'm always down for like really like out there, sort of like outside the box ideas, especially when it comes to like rebooting something that has like seven sequels.
Yeah, this would definitely cost a bunch of money, but hopefully we would be able to make the studio a good profit. This is the one thing that I was thinking about that kind of makes this an interesting pitch. So as you know, I prefer special effects, but with the dream world, especially with the advancements in technology, I feel like it has to be CGI, but I also feel like
Yeah.
I'd want to do a blend. Like I know that that's a thing, especially with slashers. They'll still try and use special effects and then CGI to help, but I also can't help but feel like it would need to just be mostly CGI. Otherwise, it's going to look really weird on the big screen. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
You'd probably have to go CGI. You could definitely make some cool sets, some cool practical sets, but I feel like to give it its full effect, you'd kind of just have to.
Yeah, that's fair. All right, so then we're going to rent out the Marvel green like building or whatever they have for all of their space stuff, and we'll film it there.
Funny you mentioned that, and the whole time I was kind of thinking like Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, and like a good CGI would be much better. But just the whole like they're in this like quantum realm, there's weird creatures and weird backgrounds and physics is different. And that's kind of what I was picturing the whole time.
Okay, so I haven't seen Quantumania, but from the way you described it, yes. Because it would, I almost want it. It's obviously not an alien planet, but I want it to feel like it's foreign, if that makes sense.
I definitely get that. And I think that's the right approach too. You don't want to make it like too I guess it could come across as too like goofy if you made it like an alien planet. It would look too much like an episode of Rick and Morty.
Yes, it this is gonna sound really bad, but I when I was talking about it being kind of like an acid trip, in my head I was like, if Rick and Morty was a horror movie.
So like they have that scary Terry stuff in the beginning, in the first
Yes.
season.
Yep.
It's like that.
Yeah, that although yes, no, I'm just gonna say yes. He wouldn't be going like deeper into dreams because I know they mix it with Inception, but yes.
Oh, cool. No, good pitch. I think these would both be very good pitches.
Yes, and the more I thought about yours, I forget if I said this or not, but I do really like your pitch. The only thing that stumped me was the parents reveal, but the more I thought about it, the more I think it would actually like work as I saw it, like for me personally. So I did want to, if I didn't say that, I did want to circle back and say I have come around to that, and I like your pitch more than I did at the beginning. Not that I didn't like it, but now I like it more.
Thank you. I didn't think of any castings either beyond just bringing Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund back, but yeah, get Radio Silence in there.
I like it. So to finish things off, kind of like we did with the previous two videos, unfortunately, there is no news as of today, filming on October 2nd. There is no news of any upcoming Nightmare on Elm Street projects, but there's a reason why. When Wes Craven sadly passed away in 2015, the Nightmare on Elm Street rights returned to his estate, which is handled by his wife. And Mrs. Craven specifically will not give anybody the rights to Nightmare on Elm Street, no matter how hard the studios try, no matter the money, because in her opinion, Nightmare was a negative thing on Wes's life. She hasn't gone into grave detail. There's probably personal stuff that we're just never going to know about. But in her head, Wes was worse off in life because of Nightmare, and so almost out of spite, she is not giving up the IP. It is almost a foregone conclusion at this point that until she passes away, and then maybe a child would be a little nicer about it, that we wouldn't get any more Nightmare stuff. Because there are some studios who have reported, of course we don't know for sure, but they've reported they've offered insane amounts of money to try and get the rights, and she's just not budging. So uh, unless a miracle happens, we would not be getting anything anytime soon. But along with the discussion of that, I wanted to see if there was, given the landscape of where we're at now, with legacy sequels, requels, all the stuff they're doing with every other horror IP, if they were to magically get the rights realistically, like of course I know we gave our pitches, what would you want to see moving forward?
I think they'll go just full on reboot. I think Robert Englund, I mean, himself has said that he's never coming back. And like I said, he's really old. And now it's all about franchising and they don't like standalones. So I feel like if you brought him back, you'd have to bring him back for a movie that would be like a trilogy at least. And I just don't think he'd be down for that or would be able to do that, being, as old as he is. I know Blumhouse was trying to get the rights, and Jason Blum posted a sort of I don't know, tone deaf tweet where he basically was like, um, yeah, like, Robert Englund says he's not coming back, but like I can get him to come back. And everyone was just like, okay, Jason. But yeah, I don't know if I'd want like a Blumhouse doing it, but I mean, I love Blumhouse, but I don't know, they kind of butchered Halloween for me, and I'm excited to see where they take Exorcist, but I do like how they're sort of like because they're known for being like small and indie horror films, and then they're like acquiring these big IPs to kind of play around with. So I do appreciate that. So maybe they could do something interesting. But yeah, I just feel like you'd have to do like a whole just total reboot.
Yeah, that's fair. It'll most likely be what happens. The other there's two things that I would want to throw out there. One, I know last time, or I guess 2 times ago, we talked about how A24 is attempting to get the rights to Halloween, and then we talked about potential show ideas or whatnot, and we also talked about how A24 is producing Crystal Lake, the TV show, and of course it hasn't come out yet, so we don't know if it's going to be good. However, uh, in my mind, I do still want the slasher universe that they've been trying to build for 3 decades at this point, but they've failed twice. And so like in my pitch number one would be maybe if it goes well, A24 could get the rights to Nightmare. I'm sure they'd have no problem getting the rights to TCM because the Netflix movie did terrible. So I, uh, I don't know. Like I feel like I still think it would be a great idea to have a slasher movie universe, especially like you said, they're trying to franchise. Everybody's trying to be like the MCU. Although I guess phase 1 through 3 MCU, because I know it's not. Take that as you will post Endgame. But so my first thing is hopefully one day in my lifetime we get the slasher universe that I've wanted for so long. But then the other pitch that I would have is I was thinking about it when you asked about Myers as a TV show, and the Crystal Lake one I think should be good. Like I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to set the bar too high, but I am excited for it. I think that Freddy might actually arguably be the best person for a TV show. I can't help but feel like the way that they could utilize him, maybe he torments a new person each week or whatever it may be. But like I feel like he actually might be really good for a TV show. So that was I'm curious what you would think about a TV show.
Yeah, no, I was actually sort of just thinking as you were talking about this, and I'm gonna completely redo my pitch to this now. But no, so like, what would you think about like we'll say 8 to 10 episode first season at least, 45 minutes to an hour each episode that takes place with two timelines, one of the original set of murders, child murders of the human, pre-burned, pre-dead Freddy Krueger, and sort of the town of Springwood trying to deal with this serial killer targeting children, and maybe Freddy Krueger's involved in it, but like we know he's the killer, they don't know he's the killer, and it can parallel with him post death, post burning, haunting the children of those parents in their dreams, and like they would put the two timelines cutting back and forth together to tell like one narrative.
So what you're saying is it's Arrow.
Yes, Arrow. So Freddy Krueger's stuck on an island.
And he becomes Batman. Oh, I'm sorry, I mean Green Arrow.
Yes. You know,
Um,
you have failed Springwood.
no, that actually, I know. Okay, so it's touchy because I understand why a lot of people are not a fan of when they use flashbacks as a narrative device. I think if it's done right, it does work really well. So I am all for utilizing flashbacks. So if I think it could be cool if once again, I feel bad for making this comparison. In my opinion, at least in the first couple seasons, I think that Arrow does a really good job with it, where the show's like 44 minutes or whatever, and they literally do like 22 minutes in the present, 22 minutes in the past, give or take, and they truly like develop both stories. I think if they did something like that and it wasn't just flashbacks when convenient, I actually think that would be really cool to
No,
see the
yeah,
events.
I completely agree. And um, yeah, definitely give them like equal screen time, time the reveals and time the twists accordingly to tell like one narrative, and have like literally like have actors playing the young parents with like little children, and then like have either just age them up or get like completely new actors that look close enough, sort of like an It Chapter 1, It Chapter 2 situation. Even though it wouldn't be as jarring because they're supposed to be like young adults versus like old adults, but like have the same set of characters just dealing with two different timelines of like the human serial killer Freddy Krueger, maybe even culminate in like his actual like trial, and then him getting let off, and then them burning the whatever, and then having that tie in with like the present of him like haunting the people, in the haunting the now grown up kids as teenagers in the
The
present.
only bad part about this pitch is because it's Hollywood, they would try and get fancy. And in the flashbacks, they'd make us think it's Freddy Krueger, but then it turns out it was Dave next door or something.
It was Corey Cunningham.
Yes, it was. And the slasher universe is born.
Yeah, no, they should do the slasher universe, and then when all the villains meet up, they all take their masks off, and it's just all they're all Corey Cunningham. He's Michael Myers, he's Jason Voorhees, he's Leatherface, and somehow he's Freddy Krueger.
I would just be. That's funny. um, but no, yeah, I do. I like that pitch. I think that I do think they should do a show if they ever get the rights. I like your idea of going back and showing what happened so many years ago. Because if I'm not mistaken, that was never really explored in any of the movies, right?
Yeah, so there's a TV show called Freddy's Nightmares
Mhm.
that I have never seen personally because it's never came to Blu-ray, and even the DVD is like really hard to find and out of print. But to my understanding, it was like an anthology show, like Tales from the Crypt, where it was like or like Twilight Zone, Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, where each thing was just like a 22-minute made for TV like horror show for like an episode, and it would be a different episode the next week. But the intros and outros were done by Robert Englund in full Freddy Krueger garb. And one of the episodes was about the trial of Freddy Krueger that he gets off at with human Freddy Krueger, and Robert Englund reprised his role as a human Freddy Krueger. And I don't know if that's really canon or not. I don't know how the rights work with that, but apparently there was an episode where they explored at least the trial with a human Freddy Krueger.
Interesting. Yeah, I knew Freddy's Nightmares existed. I watched Friday the 13th, the series. Nothing to do with Jason. And I remember watching a couple Freddy's Nightmares. Like, I don't know if you remember that channel Chiller. Probably still exists. I just don't watch TV. Or I don't have cable, I should say. But
My favorite font.
but yeah, so the Chiller would always show runs of that at like 2 a.m. So if I was ever awake, I would watch the occasional Freddy's Nightmares. But yeah. Um. Okay. So
What I did
yeah.
like about the reboot too was just like it actually shows you quite a bit of um the Freddy as a human.
Yeah. That is true. It's Yeah, I just that's really the takeaway from this entire podcast. The reboot is underrated. It gets a lot of, in my opinion, undeserved hate.
Last thing I'll say is just apparently Mike Flanagan, who most people know as the director behind like Hush and behind Gerald's Game, Doctor Sleep. He was the showrunner for Haunting of Hill House and The Haunting of Bly Manor. Apparently, he's a huge Nightmare on Elm Street fan, and he even tweeted like a fan made poster for a Legacy sequel where someone took basically what I was talking about, where they took like a picture of Freddy of Robert Englund's Freddy and like made him look all old and grizzled, gave him like some like a little white beard almost. And he was like at so and so, I'd love to do this. Let's talk. Like kind of as a joke, but he is interested, and I think he could potentially be a good director to sort of bring something like that to life.
Yeah, that's the when you mentioned the Jason Blum tweet, I had remembered there was a director who did it, and I couldn't remember who it was. So I'm glad you brought that up because I do remember the Flanagan hype. And I do agree. I
Hmm.
personally really like Hush and Gerald's Game. I have a friend who loves the Haunted series, but I never personally watched them. Well, all right.
Yeah.
Thank y'all for listening.